Top negotiators from the U.S. and China are reportedly close to outlining a deal that would end the 7-month trade war. High-level talks are being held today and tomorrow in Washington. President Trump has indicated that he's prepared to extend his self-imposed deadline of March 1st if an agreement is close. If not, tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods will go from 10% to 25%. Joining me now is Yahoo Finance's editor-in-chief, Andy Serwer. Good morning.
Good morning.
So at this point, where are they still trying to close the gap?
Yeah, I mean, it appears that the trade issue itself, the trade imbalance, is maybe getting close to resolve. But where there is still distance is in intellectual property theft and cybersecurity, as well as allowing U.S. companies to come into China, like Visa and MasterCard in particular, for instance.
So we know what the U.S. has been looking for from China, but do you think we might learn about some concessions the U.S. is making to China in these trade deals?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point, and I think that monitoring the agreement, which is critical going forward. In other words, we've had agreements with the Chinese before, Alexis, but they haven't lived up to them, quite frankly. So I think understanding how we are going to officially sort of police this is a big concession that the Chinese are going to have to make. In other words, there has to be more transparency in terms of the Chinese economy and in terms of monitoring various parts of the Chinese government, which of course is kind of the crown jewels of how the whole political system works. So very sensitive stuff. That's
the big challenge, and I don't think we would hear anything about that, at least at this point in the trade deal, when they outline, they're talking about outlining 6 memorandums of interest here.
That's right.
So we're not expecting to hear just how the U.S. is going to keep an eye on these new rules.
Right. We may never hear that. I mean, but that entails a whole level of trust between the Chinese government and the U.S. government that we haven't really had before. In other words, the relationship has been good for these years, all these decades since President Nixon first visited Beijing, but the level of trust, that the transparency that is required to understand, okay, you're not actually spying on us, at least in a really overt horrible way. We're stealing secrets, because all countries do spy on each other a little bit. That is something that's going to be very difficult to work out, and I think we should pay attention to that.
What do you think China is asking for from us? Because that hasn't been super clear. And do you think we might learn when they outline this deal what the U.S. is giving up, if anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are certain places where the Chinese do want concessions. For instance, in case you haven't noticed, there's no Chinese cars in the United States, right? And that has been a bit of a sticky point. I mean, they have a huge car industry. So those kinds of things, allowing Chinese companies to do more business here. We know about the problems that Huawei has had, for instance. That's a whole other kettle of fish.
Right.
But in other words, Chinese companies have also tried to do mergers and acquisitions here. Ant Financial tried to buy a company here not long ago. That's stickiest part of the U.S. government that's been blocking Chinese deals. I think that would be another thing where the Chinese would like to see some movement on our part.